coming from the topic of love to some more different topics. Our next speaker, he's investor and member of PwC's global legal leadership team. As well, he is an author of 8 books about the topics innovation and disruption, as well as regulation. And on his free time, he's passionate about rock music and was playing as well a very long time in different bands. And now he just combined his favorite topics and still doing legal stuff for rock bands, he just told me, like Rammstein, for example. Very nice. But he's here today with the topic of appetite for disruption in the exponential technical age, the dynamics of innovation and regulation. Please welcome on stage Guenther. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay, it's the technology age. Now it works. Thank you so much for hanging around and listening to what I have to say. So I think it's the true privilege of one generation if you get to live through the unfolding of one transformative technology. And I emphasize the transformative rather than the disruptive, which is kind of strange because disruption is in the title. I'm the founder of Disruption Disciples. The title of my book is called Appetite for Disruption, but actually I don't like it. Right? It's one of the most overused and least understood words ever. Just sounds really good, especially if you say it real fast. This is why I want to get to the gist of it. But coming back to this privilege, it's very rare if you look into history when you really get to live through the rollout of a truly transformative technology. Now our generation, your generation, gets to do this not once, but several times, because we live in the age of transformative technologies coming at us at a really unprecedented height, because it is indeed the age of exponential technologies, and also, since it is increasingly, and we're entering the age of true liquid talent, the opportunity to involve yourselves in all of those technologies, which is also a first in human history, because 200 years ago you were brought up to do what your daddy done. You couldn't choose what you wanted to do. This luxury didn't exist. And also today we are still locked into our corporate structures, but that is going away. So when I talk about exponential technologies, Ray Kurzweil has been noted, there's a long, long list of them. The one I'm personally really passionate about is blockchain, which is dead center in here, but there's many others out there, IoT, VR, AI, and so forth. And it's the combination of those technologies that creates the exponentiality out of all of this. There is also huge societal change coming about, because based on the technology, we are potentially moving away to a decentralized, a disintermediated world, which will allow us to go back to where we were before the Industrial Revolution. This is being entrepreneurs around our specific talents. Today, you need even a company like ours, PwC, or any brand, to be able to do the really exciting stuff, because people otherwise wouldn't entrust one specific person to do this. But I firmly believe that 10, maybe 20 years from now, we won't need that anymore. We will be able to connect the talent directly based on those technology platforms that are connecting us in the future. And what it means is we will move from those pyramids which we erected as a result of the Industrial Revolution, because we needed it at the time. We had no idea how to organize hundreds and thousands of people at that time. We only had 2 blueprints, and that was the army and the church, right? And we can debate on, well, they are very efficient for sure, but how good they are. And right now we are sort of somewhere in between. We actually have more rockets rather than pyramids. We have sort of more expertise and then little helpers, technology and so forth. But ultimately I believe we will move into something like this, which is people forming centers of gravity around their capabilities, and basically, depending on the attractiveness, on the validity of those, collaborating, doing away with some of the structures we had previously. Now, the good question that always comes at me is, when is it going to happen? And if I knew, I wouldn't be standing here, right? I would be out there hustling and investing. But we have some indication, and this is from our friends and colleagues in the US, of course, and they create those horizons of technology disruption. And when you look at blockchain, which is this one thing I'm so passionate about, it's sort of square in the middle, and it's going to indicate that it's going to be 5-6 years from now until this is going to reach a tipping point into mass adoption. And that sounds like a hell of a long way away, which it isn't. If you look again into the history, and I'm sure you've all seen that slide and that speech line that goes with it. It's been an internet meme going around, and what it essentially says is it took 75 years for the car and the telephone to connect 50 million people. It's actually wrong from a statistical perspective, because in 1910 there was no 50 million people in the US, but the one thing that is true is the argument underneath, that the uptake speed is ever increasing ever since then, right? And then usually the tagline that goes with this is the same time it took the car, or the time it took the car to reach 50 million users has been not halved, has been not turned into a fraction of it. No, it was 35 days for the usual example that is being brought, Angry Bird, but what they really mean is Tinder, to go there. Which is true. This is what you can do today with connected worlds. And it is true. I see it every day with my little son. He just got an iPad like half a year ago. And you know, he goes to school, and his friends tell him about an app, and he downloads it. And within one day, the entire village has it. Within 1 week, the entire city has it. This is how it grows and how it transcends not only local boundaries, but global boundaries. Everybody who has ever met me has to go through what is coming now. And this is one slide that has been defining my life, really, all my venture investment activity and so forth. And I firmly believe that if you understand this one, you don't ever go wrong when it comes to technology, right? Problem is that most people don't really understand it, and it took me 20 years to really understand the fundamentals below it. So I would like to share it with you, because you can get your money back, but you can't get your time back. So I would like to give you something that I hope will equip you for these exciting times we're living in there. And it's this slide. You can barely see it, I assume. It's basically a composition of two graphs. The one is the bell curve of adoption, which everybody has heard about. Why? Because it's from Harvard Business School, and they're really good at selling and packaging things. There's nothing wrong with it, but the more important one is the other one. That's the S curve. That comes from Jim Utter back from MIT. That's the guys down the Charles River, but that's the guys with the Nobel Prizes. But they are not so salesy. One of the most important books ever written, it's called Mastering the Dynamics of Innovation. It was published in 1988, and you should try to get hold of it on eBay. And what it tells you is that all innovations ever in the history of innovations have started like this, in the form of an S-curve. At the beginning, there's a lot of innovation going on. Hundreds and thousands of people competing with their versions for your hearts and your wallets, until at some point, a dominant design arises. Once that dominant design is there, everything switches. There is no more radical innovation, everything goes to incremental improvement. It comes down to things like marketing, production, etc. And what you have is upwards consolidation. From hundreds and thousands of players for any given industry, you go to 30, 40 players, or big four, or whatever. And you end up with something sitting on the top of that S-curve that is run by men in ties. And this then gives typically rise to disruption. And what is disruption, technically speaking? A new S-curve starting. Now, a new S-curve always starts from outside of the established industry. No disruptive innovation has ever come from inside of the disruptive innovation. Why is that? Because there's those men in ties sitting up on the S-curve looking down on some kids coming out of a garage, telling them that's going to bring him down. They don't get it. They can't believe it. They're sitting in their ivory tower. They never get it. And there is not one case in history where anybody has managed to go from one S-curve to the other. I can't think of a horse carriage producer who today is a car producer. I can't think of a typewriter producer who today is a computer producer. So that's the problem with disruption. Everybody dies. And this is why it's not cool in the interim, right? And also you can't base yourself on anything, because there's nothing to predict it. There is no business case you can build around that. Now, truth is, that is very, very rare. Mostly we see evolution, and evolution is a good thing, right? Because that doesn't kill everything off and destroys everything. Also, I love my Schumpeter, don't get me wrong, right? But this is the part everybody goes wrong. If we talk disruption, why are we doing it here? We won't need a Handelskammer in the future or a Rathaus, because we will be on the blockchain, everything will be consensus building. If we believe in disruption, there won't be banks, there won't be a PwC, there won't be anything. It's building horse carriages. I don't believe that because it's not that simple, especially when you talk about a regulated industry. There, the dominant design is created by regulation, not by technology. I'm not with my bank because of its technology, I'm with my bank despite its technology, right? I'm with my bank because I trust it, because it has another function. And if you don't comply with the regulatory dominant design, you're building horse carriages. I know that because I come from Switzerland. That's the third most important market in the world for the distribution of fund products. We've been wiped off the face of the planet within 15 years. Why? Well, there is no material difference between a Swiss securities fund and a Luxembourg UCITS fund. Well, it's not a UCITS fund. You can't export this thing. We are building horse carriages. 15 years, it's all gone. So also you need to understand that, right? And so there's other dynamics and you need to couple them, and that is the difficult thing, because you need to get the technology dominant design and the regulatory and societal standard dominant design right, which is very, very difficult. So this is what you need to understand. That's the true dynamic, and this gives you guidance on where you are in the equation and what you can do. And also, not to slander Harvard, but what we see now, and this is from our friends from Accenture, Big Bang disruption. We don't go through this uptake cycle anymore, where we start with the freaks and the geeks, we go to the early adopters, the late adopters, and then the maturity. No, we have the trial users, and boom, we go to mass adoption. This is what I see with my son. This is the new reality out there. So if you get it right, and if you want to make the change, you can make the change really fast. This is the exciting thing. I love technology, but I would like to end with a quote. Everybody ends with a quote of somebody typically dead and minimum one Nobel Prize. I usually end with a quote from Burning Man, because everything I've ever known, or more than I ever learned in school, I learned from a 3-minute record baby, as Bruce Springsteen said. Well, in my case, I learned everything I need to know at Burning Man. Most amazing people there. And they have an amazing quote on their webpage, which says, the only appropriate response to new technology is not to go into your corner and think it's going to bring you down and eat you up, and also not to think that it's going to save the planet. You got to do that yourself. The only approach to use it is to say, okay, what are we going to do with this thing? So be realistic, embrace it, take it, and build something amazing with and around it, knowing the dynamics of innovation, knowing where you are, so you have guidance on, depending on where in the cycle of technology innovation you are, to do the right thing. Focus either on the technology or the rollout and do amazing things with that. It is the most amazing times ever in the history of humankind, despite of whoever sits in the White House right now, because no generation ever has had so many opportunities to do amazing things. So let's do just that by working together and turning the world into something better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and just being on time, just have like 12 seconds left. So, we can just start now with the time that's your time, having some questions from the audience. Are there any questions? You can just come down and give you the mic.
Hi, I'm Axel. I am in the process of founding, and one thing I'm quite curious about, because you seem to be quite a fan of blockchain. What is your opinion on DAOs, distributed autonomous
Daos.
organizations?
Well, it's obviously one of the pillars of the very concept of blockchain, right? And all the problems we've ever had in the world start with centralization, right? It's usually a guy screwing up somewhere. I shouldn't say that in the presence of PwC colleagues, but that's the truth. It's somebody being bribed, somebody making a mistake, whatever. So the moment we decentralize that, we have consensus building, we have organizations that are not controlled with their own idea, this should go away. And again, coming from Switzerland, I kind of know that, right? Switzerland is a country that shouldn't exist. Not saying it's perfect, but we got different languages, we got different religions, everything that was good for 800 years of war in Europe, well, we never had that. Obviously, there was not a lot to quarrel about anyway, but somebody from Lugano and somebody from Geneva, they can't even communicate with each other. Well, why does it work? Because it's distributed and there's consensus building in there. So once you take the ego out of it, you put the trust into the machine as you do there, I firmly believe you can take away this problem. And I'm not a fan test, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not talking about cryptocurrency and any of that bullshit. I'm just talking about the technological solution which may allow us to get kind of what allowed to flourish an ecosystem like Switzerland, right in the heart of Europe, and everybody's side, but nobody gets it, to do it on a large scale for any kind of application. And last sentence, where the internet fundamentally changed the way we interact, blockchain will fundamentally change the way we transact. Right? So we will have the trust in the machine, and that will change everything, how we do drugs, how we make money on music, distribute it fairly to musicians and so forth. All of those things that have been totally screwed up over the past 30 years with the digital revolution by the concentration. And that was a pivotal point for that.
Thank you. Did answer your questions? Yeah. Are there any more questions? Hands up. Perhaps I can just start with one. So there's so many students at the moment, every Friday going to the street demonstrating for their future. What would you tell them? Is there something you want, like with all your experience, what do you want to tell them?
I don't know. I don't know more. I'm just older. So who am I to tell? But yesterday I have this video series which is called Appetite for Disruption, Creative as I Am, right? And there I'm interviewing mostly rock stars and inventors. The idea being to get a band out of a garage into an arena is like getting a company out of a co-working space to an IPO with an ICO thrown in for good measure. And when you look at how bands work, you know, then this is kind of indicative of how you do things. And yesterday I did an interview with Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath and Matt Sorum of Guns N' Roses fame, and they said one thing sort of in unison in this video. They said, look, you gotta get through fear. And everybody has fear. By going into groups and so forth and demonstrating, I think it's a good first step, but usually it's just delaying the problem. You could just fix it, you know. What is it you're really talking about? I mean, you know, it's usually societal problems, it's concentrated, centralized issues. Well, just create a technical solution and get rid of it, right? Just do it, just go through it. It's like when I was in the band, we were sitting in the rehearsal room for 2 years before we did our first concert. And once we did it, you know, we were like, and the same when I had to give my first speech, I was like, well, I couldn't go on stage almost. And last year I've been speaking in front of 65,000 people in Las Vegas. Yeah, I still get a buzz, but it's easy. It comes from doing it, so don't overthink it. Yes, you can hide in the masses and you can move some things in the masses, but just do your thing, get out there and get to the other side of fear.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yeah, another one.
I have another question, maybe a bit more critical regarding the disruption always comes from these small companies. I now see Google and all these big tech companies, they just buy all the interesting technologies, like for example the deep learning, what's the company called? The AlphaGo company, forgot the name.
Right.
But yeah, this artificial intelligence, which was not Google's main innovation, seems to be now also their main power.
Well, that usually works because the S-curve is obviously the consolidation of many S-curves. So they're really good at integrating stuff, right? But for the really disruptive stuff, it doesn't work. So that was what I've been doing for 20 years. I just went to the Silicon Valley, checked out what they were doing, transported it over here, still had 5 years to make it happen. But for example, blockchain, to come back to it, I was so surprised not to see anything coming out of the valley. And when I went there, I realized why that is. Because they're all about centralization. It's at the core, and I don't want to slander them. They're great companies in their own rights, right? They don't get it. It's against their DNA. This is why places like Switzerland and Berlin and then Malta and Estonia are far ahead because they have a different approach. Now, what we see now with Libra, which is all over the news, with Facebook and this entire conglomerate getting into blockchain, which has nothing to do with the principles, obviously, anymore. It's totally bastardizing it. That's the system fighting back. But usually, and it's not about small or not, it also can be big companies coming from the outside, but it needs a different mindset. And what it's about is how does innovation happen? If you put 3 lawyers in a room, what are you expecting? A nicer contract or a fist fight, right? But if you take a biologist, a marketing expert, a lawyer, and a philosopher in a room, put them together, this is where the new stuff comes. If you want to move forward, you need traction, and traction comes with friction. You need to put different things together, then the new thing starts. And this is what big companies struggle with because they're all around optimizing the status quo. There's nothing wrong with that, huh? So this is why I believe in disruption coming from the outside.
Thank you so much for being here, for your talk and answering all our questions. We have as well a little present for you backstage.
Thank you.
Thank you.